Morning, everyone. Lovely to see everyone online, and welcome to Strategy Cafe. This, I think, is our third or fourth session we've done on succession. We've got some wonderful videos recorded on my YouTube channel, taking sort of different aspects of this issue, this sort of transitional phase that nearly everyone in business goes through at some point. And today's session is I'm just delighted to welcome Bryony and Tom, who are going to introduce themselves to you in just a second. So we're going to be talking about succession from the point of view of the person who's retiring, which I think is an unusual and refreshing angle on this. So maybe Bryony, I can come to you. So say hi to everybody and tell us who you are.
Hi there, I'm Bryony Cove. I'm a partner at Farrow & Co solicitors in central London. I've worked here for 18 years. I've been qualified since '96. I specialise in private client work, which means traditional trusts, wills, probate, etc. But really, where my heart lies is in working with families who not only have personal wealth, but also commercial wealth. So family businesses, entrepreneurs, landed estates, that sort of thing. I'm also passionately interested in mental health, mental capacity, and the well-being of clients, which has enabled me to develop a practice of fabulous clients, but also fabulous lawyers here and a network of great people like Nick all over the UK and in the wider world. What really drives me is helping people and assisting people and guiding people. I'd like to think I'm a problem solver, not a problem creator. So that's me.
That's a nice line. Thank you very much, Bryony. Welcome to Strategy Cafe. And Tom.
Morning. My name's Tom. I've been a partner at KPMG for actually 23 years now. And actually I'm coming up to my 33rd year at KPMG. So I'm what they call a lifer, you know. I've got lots of really great clients, to be honest, and a bit like Bryony. I love working with family businesses. I took on a global role for the firm about 5 years ago. So spend all of my time really talking to family businesses and, you know, picking up insights as to what's troubling them. And hopefully, like Bryony, I'm a problem solver, not a problem creator. It's a great line, that actually. I'll probably pinch it when Bryony's not on the screen. So I really enjoyed that aspect of it. And I was a tax inspector for a while, which is how I then joined KPMG. And before that, I was a teacher. And some of the skills I learned as a teacher have come in really handy when I'm on a stage or, you know, training a class, because, you know, I quite like that interaction with the people who are listening, hopefully. So really enjoy the family business space and really looking forward to this discussion.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. And welcome, Tom. So just before we get going, I just wanted to get a feel from everyone listening, just where you're at with succession. So, you know, whether it's you going through succession, whether someone in your family is going through this, whether you're an advisor in that space. I'm just going to launch a poll. Everyone, if you can just quickly just you know, pick the one that's most relevant to you. And then we'll have a look. Share results. So we've got some of you, one person going through succession, some of you thinking about succession, some of you helping people through succession. There we go, kind of a mixed group. Right, coming back to you then, Tom. When the three of us were just chatting about this, you had this beautiful idea that when we talk about succession, most of the energy is put into the next generation who are taking over. And perhaps not enough attention is paid to the person who's retiring and just how tough that can be. And I know it's not tough for everybody, but for most people, it is either somewhat tough or very tough to do this. And for everyone, even if they've got their head straight about it, it's a felt experience for sure. But it was a lovely idea from you. And I just wonder maybe if you could just kick us off by telling us a bit about that and why you thought this was a good subject.
Sure, like happy to do that. So there were two angles to this for me, really. The first is a very personal angle because, as I mentioned, you know, I've been with KPMG 33 years, and actually I will be retiring in the next 12, 18 months. And so my own mind has been focusing quite hard on not just succession, but actually what am I going to do when I leave KPMG? Because KPMG, frankly, has been like a marriage for me. It's had its ups and downs, but it's been brilliant overall. And I've actually started to feel, so not just think, but started to feel a little bit anxious, a little bit scared, a little bit, also a little bit, confident, I suppose, that I'll be able to do something else, and trying to, I suppose, adopt one of my favorite theories, which is the growth mindset. So don't focus on what could go wrong or whatever, but actually focus on how am I going to turn this next chapter of my life into something different, but really valuable, not just to me, but to everybody around me. So there's that personal angle that has really got me thinking about it. And then from the point of view of my clients, it was really brought home to me, and I'll just tell a quick client story, because I always like to talk about clients because it brings it to life. I was speaking on a stage a few years ago, and there was a young chief exec in the audience who asked me to go and see him separately to talk about family governance. So I went to their premises, and within 5 minutes of us sitting down in a room, the door flew open and his father came in. And he thought his father was away, but in fact, his father had heard that this big shot from KPMG was in the building, so he wanted to come and quiz me about family governance. And what was really interesting about that was that the father immediately took over, and the son reverted to being a son, frankly, and the father held court. And eventually the father left, and they actually had a bit of an argument during the discussion, and I felt a bit more like a referee and a therapist than a family governance advisor. And when the father had gone, the son said to me, "Oh my goodness, I can only apologize." And I said, well, don't apologize. What is actually going on? And he was really open with me, and he said the biggest mistake he had made in transitioning to the chief exec was focusing entirely on what he was going to do and making some big assumptions about his father, and that his father would be really happy just to kind of say, right, that's my 35 years up, I'm off to sail my yacht. And for me, we actually spent the next half hour just having a really good discussion around how you might kind of turn that situation on its head more. And I guess it was a really good lesson for me, which is, don't make assumptions. Try and have a really open conversation early, even if that conversation might be quite challenging. And I know from our previous discussion, Bryony had some really good examples on that as well, Bryony, didn't you? I think around just trying to have that communication happening as soon as possible.
Absolutely. And I think that just to sort of start with where I come from, the years of work and emotional investment in a business, which is going to be succeeded to by a family, or any sort of active wealth, it can't be underestimated. And I think that sometimes parents will paint a very positive picture of what the role is going to be like without necessarily making a true connection on a level playing field, as it were, because you have that parent-child dynamic. One of the families I've been working for, probably the family I've been working for with the longest, they started their journey in a very organised way, with a proper consultant who was there for the entire family, and was thinking not only about the children but also the principals who had founded the business. And he was absolutely incredible. That man was absolutely inspired in the way that he set up how this was going to work. And then it was sort of when he retired about 4 years in, we started 15 years ago, it was kind of over to me to a certain extent, but it was also very much over to the family. And I think the thing that they have found, they've been extremely successful at the handover. It's taken 15 years. We've only just got to the point where one of the principals, their husband and wife, has actually retired as a director. The other is still a director, but is a real sort of figurehead rather than active in the business. And the children are very, very active in the business now. But that was the most enormous emotional wrench. And that parent did it overnight after a family dinner about 3 months ago, completely, as it turns out, to everybody else out of the blue. And that could have been so much better managed. And we're all now turning to that parent and going, God, we really need to support them. But actually, the warning signs, I think, were probably already there, that it was going to be as much of a struggle for them as it was for the children to step into what were very, very big shoes. You know, the ex-CEO of the business, your parent, your loving parent, your much loved parent. And actually, that was a real lesson to me. And I learn lessons all the time as we go along. And I think there are examples where it's done beautifully, but there are far more examples where it's actually quite traumatic. Even if it's a short, sharp shock, it's still that trauma. And maybe sometimes you need to rip off the plaster. But knowing you're going to rip off the plaster is the most important thing. Doing it in a sort of way that people aren't expecting, I think, can be quite painful.
I think it's worth just chatting a little bit about that idea of trauma. I think that's a good word to bring up. And I think it sort of cuts to this issue that it doesn't really matter what you think about this. So you can think it's going to be fine. But it's not really about that. It's about how it feels. And you can't really know how it feels until you're in the midst of it or doing it. And so, you know, it's quite difficult to properly anticipate what it's going to be like for you. And I think this causes quite a few problems. And I quite like this idea of thinking about it from just for the moment. And we obviously want to turn it into like the positive part of the conversation, but just starting with this idea of the wrench. I think that's really real. So one way of thinking about it is from a sort of neuroscience perspective is you spent 30, 40 years doing something. So your nervous system is finely tuned. Your habits are finely tuned. Your daily rhythms are finely tuned, and it's shaped inside you. And just to stop doing that, your body suddenly has all of this active nervous system that has regularly done this every day for 40 years. You know, and suddenly it's not got the counterpoint. It's not got the stimulation. And so that, you know, sometimes you say it feels like a void. It's actually genuinely represented as a void inside you because your nerves that have been fine-tuned to doing that for 40 years are no longer having the stimulation. And I think that's maybe just a way in. It's similar to something like a grief experience, you know, or a loss of some sort. Does that make sense to you too?
Yeah, I reckon. I think it's a great analogy, the cycle of grief. Actually, that there's a certain piece at the beginning where you're almost denying that it's going to happen. You know, you can't quite believe it, and then gradually you come to a phase of sort of acceptance. I guess one of the points that you know I'd be interested in Bryony's view on this as well is, you know, we talk a lot about helping the founder and supporting the founder. It's really good to think about, you know, what they might do going forward. But I think there's also some accountability on the founder. You know, the founder, in my experience, the ones who have been the most successful have actually spent some time building their own self-awareness around what they would like to do, what they see as their strengths, developments, opportunities. So really going through a bit of a self-challenge process as well. And I think what was really interesting in your poll, Nick, was that, you know, you've got probably 38% of our audience today saying they're actually helping someone else go through this. So they're performing that kind of third party role. And Bryony, I guess in your experience, I mean, what's best actually when you're performing that third party role?
So I suppose being clear that as an advisor, which is always where I'm coming from, although I am a trustee for some of these families too, as an advisor, thoughtfully introducing into the conversation that the founder can talk offline, confidentially. You know, this doesn't need to all be about the legals. Please don't think I'm just here to talk to you about tax. You know, I'm here to talk to you about everything in the round and your experience of it. And I think the most successful people that I'm dealing with who are passing over wealth have heard that and they do it. And they ring me and they text me and they say, can we just have a quick word? And we have half an hour. And they sense check, and they don't just sense check with me, they sense check with other advisors and other close family friends or trustees as well. I think you can sort of consult in a sense. You're absolutely right. Developing your own self-awareness is about self-reflection. It's about thinking about how you feel, how it's going to impact you as an individual. And I think there's a virtuous circle that the most successful people will create, which will then make life easier for everybody else because they've made it easier for themselves. And I think that so many people look up to a principal, a head of a family, whatever you want to call them. So many people look up to them. They need to remember that they're on a pedestal. If they want to get off the pedestal, they've got to join the crowd. So they've got to work with the crowd. And then somebody else is going to, or maybe another group is going to go up onto the pedestal. And of course, we see that a lot more now. We see less single leaders. But my experience is that having that self-awareness, and then, as you say, having other things to do, practical other things to do. So your adrenaline levels drop, but they don't fall to the floor, is absolutely integral to how they do it. And charity work, other businesses, angel investing, grandchildren, golf, sailing, whatever it is, finding those things and really making that your job, in a sense, means that it's not quite such a plunge. But I mean, Tom, you spoke very eloquently when we were talking about this before, about your own journey. Presumably you can now talk to clients about your own journey, and that humanizes the journey for them. I'm not quite there. I'm probably a decade or so out, but it's that must be a great opportunity for you.
Well, it's a great point, Bryony. And I know when we spoke before, we talked about the power of disclosure. Your ability as an advisor to share something of yourself, which hopefully resonates with the client. And certainly, my current experience, I talk about how I'm feeling and how I'm trying to analyze what's going on in my brain, but also frankly, in my heart, in terms of the emotions attached to leaving KPMG, And I actually, and this is just a little tool that I sometimes use with clients, and it's you might be familiar with it, Bryony, with the kind of psychology aspect of this. But I did a counselling course in KPMG about 4 or 5 years ago, and one of the tools that they taught us was this mechanism called a lifeline, and you literally get a sheet of paper and you plot your life, you draw a line, and you note the parts of your life where they were the biggest life-changing experiences for you, and you reflect on why those things, really impacted you. So you end up with little kind of spikes and sometimes troughs, actually. And I sometimes use that with clients and say, have you ever actually sat down and done that? Because actually, once you've drawn it and you stand back from it and reflect on it, it really brings home, I think, what's important to you, what has really shaped you over the last, 30, 40 years. And it's quite a useful mechanism for then thinking about, well, here's why those things were important to me then. So let's think about how I might replicate that importance going forward, but by doing something different. Does that sort of make sense?
It does. It makes complete sense.
Yeah, patterns of behavior, really, really important. I mean, Nick, you're the tool king. I think tools are critical to all of this. They don't need to be very complicated tools, but being able to visually just demonstrate things to clients. I'm constantly, if anyone sits in a room with me, I'm scribbling on a piece of paper. So what about this, this, and this? And making sense of things. But you're a bit more academic about it.
Yeah, can I ask you both a question? So here I think, the two of you talking really eloquently that you need to make the person who's retiring needs to own this. So that's obviously right. Okay, so it's obviously right, and in a way, I don't want to say that people struggle with that. I'd like to kind of introduce this idea of messiness here. So it's not like an evenly split world between those people who, on retirement, realize that they're retiring and own it perfectly, and then other people who don't think about it and not conscious of it. That's like a sort of an untrue version of the world. I think everyone who's going through this knows what's going on. Everyone feels it. Everyone's going through their own journey, but life is messy. We're talking a little bit here about how we can help uncover or provide resource to the person that's feeling that mess and help them. Your beautiful example, Tom, of the lifeline. It's kind of like a simple visual way of tidying it up by putting it on the line, right? So it's like visually kind of tidy it and sort it. So it's a beautiful idea, lovely tool. But I guess, you know, the lived experience of this is people are messy. So at one stage, they might seem fine. And then, you know, a few months later, suddenly everything that you thought was settled and fine is not fine anymore. Yeah. How do you relate to the next generation, you know, help, you know, taking it on, and then they've got their father or their mother there, and there's this messiness. You know, what's your experience of helping them, you know, support that or understand that, not themselves get annoyed by that or find it frustrating or, you know, get lost in the relationship while this is going on? What are your tips?
Well, maybe I kick off. For me, it's sitting with them on and I do really like the one-to-one basis, you know, and then coming back together as a group and saying, well, look, here's where it feels you guys are aligned, and here's where the gaps are. Let's talk about how we can help plug the gaps. But it is for me, it's about focus. You know, to your point about messiness, how can we as advisors help them bring some order to all of the things that are, you know, buzzing around, not just from, if you like, the operational challenges that they've got, because there are people who can help them with that, but the emotional and mental challenges, I suppose, that are happening as they go through that transition. And it's about listening really actively, I think. Language, I think, is really important. You know, once you get into a good discussion and you're listening keenly as to the type of language people use, it's a great clue into what they're actually thinking and feeling. So for me, it does feel more like counseling and therapy than it does advising. You know, when it's at its best, that's what it feels like. I don't know, Brian, if that's your experience as well.
I think that's right, and I always keep myself very grounded when I'm having those conversations in the fact that I am there just to advise and facilitate. But you do get drawn into some very intimate information from all sides often, and just I call it diplomatic honesty, is that you do pull your punches. It's not your job to not pull the punches. It's your job to be diplomatic and careful and thoughtful, and having some sort of awareness of how therapy works. Having a structure to a therapeutic conversation is really important as well. It's not just a sort of free-for-all. And so you go back to your old tools of an agenda, etc. You just have to memorize it and not give it to them on a piece of paper that looks all formal and here we are at, you know, so-and-so offices. And just making sure you keep things on track. And I suppose it's that facilitation, isn't it, Nick?
Yeah, I think it is.
So I think Nick's trying to.
Oh, sorry, Nick.
What about the next generation? Have I dropped out?
No, I can hear
you.
you.
Say the question again.
Yeah, just for the next generation. So for the sons and daughters that are helping, rather than from the advisor's perspective, you know, what have you seen that's good? What have you seen that works from the next gen? What can they do?
I think if they develop good listening skills, that's a huge bonus. And families are quite rough and tumble. And if you can slightly take them away from the kitchen table and say, this is a serious discussion about serious things, and they have developed good listening skills, that's the most helpful way to be. And then you need the older generation to be as honest as they feel they can be, whilst it's that whole respect and open communication, again, whilst being honest in a diplomatic way. And there are all types of honesty, and some can be quite cruel. And I think you almost have to be at the kindest part of the spectrum, I would say, on all fronts. And that's the youngsters as well, and not make assumptions. Tom.
That's lovely.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I think for me, the other thing that I discovered when I went through a bit of a tough time, maybe 20 years or so ago, was the awareness that actually I didn't have a very wide support network. I thought I was popular, if that's the right word, and I had lots of mates, I suppose, But when I actually sat down and realized that I literally had one or two people that I could have a proper conversation with, that seemed a really small number. And I was given advice at the time, you know, you may have other times in your life when you're being challenged. Make sure that the next time you've actually built, you know, a slightly broader support network. So what I often say to the next gen is just challenge yourself around your own networks. Have you got a small community of people outside of the family that you really can have a proper conversation with, and you can learn from them and they can learn from you, because it's incredibly valuable. And I think a bit like your cycle of grief, Nick, the other thing I say is, you know, in the same way that grief isn't linear, you know, that cycle, you go back and forth along that. You don't get to the end and think, oh, thank goodness that's all over. It's okay to feel like you're feeling the same things again that you thought you had dealt with previously, because sometimes it works like that. And just, I think just sharing some insights around that, I think is helpful for that next gen group to feel like they are, I guess, taking a little bit of control over the situation themselves and not being at the whim of anything that just happens, you know.
I think that's really beautifully put. So I've got some great ideas there. So, you know, firstly about treating these conversations as serious conversations. And I love your point, Bryony, about families can be very rough and tumble. That just absolutely speaks to sort of family dynamic, family business dynamic. It's very organic, it's very natural. You sometimes hear non-family business leaders saying, it's hard for me to tune into how they talk, because they just talk like they talk around the dinner table, around the kitchen, and you know, it's not quite such formal language. So it's just a beautiful phrase, the rough and tumble. So making a space to take these difficult conversations and agreeing that you're in your relationship, that you will do that and you'll talk it out. And then, you know, Tom, your beautiful idea about, you know, just picking up on my messiness point, that it's actually okay, you know, to re-experience things you thought you had gone. I think sometimes when that happens, my experience is that the next generation can feel like all the progress they felt they made has been wiped away, because they thought it was done and it was closed, and then suddenly 6 months later the same issues coming back up, and with quite a lot of feeling. And you know, I think, you know, normalizing that is actually quite a good thing to say. That's normal, and you just have to give it that time. So I think this is really good stuff. Maybe we could just, you know, towards the end of our discussion, talk about it from a more positive and generative point of view. So, you know, we talked about the you know, experiencing the shock of the change at the moment of doing it, and no matter how much you think about it, actually the heartfelt experience is the thing, and how deep it is within us, and how important it is for the person who's retiring to own it, and to own what they're going through. And how some of the next generation kind of open up to that and create conversational space for that, and try and understand that the person that's retiring doesn't know what they're doing. You know, but you know, once you get that acceptance and you start to sort of tune into this is what it might feel like, and this kind of void idea. Earlier on in the conversation, we're talking about filling life up. So, you know, what is the joy? You know, what is the possibility? You know, what is available to someone who's got 30, 40 years of deep business experience? You know, give me some examples of clients that have done this well, that have found, you know, really tuned into this next phase of life properly and seen it as a good thing. Have you got examples?
I've got one in particular, and one of the points that I meant to make earlier that I haven't made, but I'll make it now, is I don't think we should underestimate the impact of the pandemic on people, because one of the things that happened in the pandemic was it was an accelerator for people thinking about their own purpose, you know, and in particular, I think I've seen many founders who thought they would carry on a bit longer actually thinking, gosh, you know, mortality is a real thing. Maybe now I need to think about handing over a bit earlier. And the most successful ones, I think, have really applied themselves to that process, and thought about the next phase. And I know it sounds a bit corny, but really as the next chapter. And that next chapter, and I think Bryony alluded to it earlier, but that next chapter is going to be a real mix of things. So let's have a portfolio approach to life in my next chapter, as opposed to just one single thing that I'm going to focus on, namely the business. And the best ones have worked out, you know, that they still want to be able to help the business in some capacity, but that needs to be limited by time. They want to be able to have some family time. They want to have some social time. And maybe they want to start doing something new that they've never had the time to do, but have always wanted to do. And if you approach it with that kind of, gosh, this could be really exciting, actually, and I'm healthy enough to enjoy it, then the mindset shift becomes quite pronounced, I think.
Yeah, amazing. Bryony.
So an amazing example I have is of a family where sadly the principal died last year, but he had made it his, I suppose, he treated his family, like his grandchildren, as if they were the most precious thing in the world. And so he had a great love of fishing. He would take his grandsons and his granddaughters fishing. When one of them was really not doing very well at school, struggling after parents got divorced, the kid moved in with him for 6 weeks with a tutor, really pulled his socks up, spent a lot of time in a very loving household. That was not his own household, which was loving, but a little bit less happy at the time. He really threw himself into sharing his life with his grandchildren, which I thought was very, very inspiring. And I think is, going to the pandemic point, family has come to the fore so much because people missed each other so much. They now realise the time they may have lost, particularly with 2 generations down, sometimes 3. And so I think that sense of portfolio is very important, but also that sense of family for family's sake has, I think, been more highlighted for a lot of our older generation. And I think it should inspire their kids to do the same, if you see what I mean. It's creating a sort of a virtuous circle of behaviour that is very positive. I think there's also the danger, and I have seen a couple of people who've retired along the way become quite unwell when they've retired. I think that can be quite a tough thing. And so making the most, retiring a little bit early, making the most of everything, retiring gradually when you're in your 50s or 60s rather than waiting until you're in your 70s, all of those things I think are a real positive change, that you're not going to hang on till you're 85. So that's a really positive way of doing it.
Really good ideas. So thank you very much. Some wonderful contributions. Just to wrap up, just a couple of minutes, I want to just touch on one final question. So we talked a little bit about how hard it is, and then ways that the person themselves can get support, can start to think about it, can start to open this up, and then just towards the end here about good approaches to sort of really engaging with this next phase of life. To fill up, and I just want to say here that the idea of letting go is a little bit of a cliche in this debate. It's more to do with transforming into the next phase and changing your relationship to things. And so kind of get the language of letting go, but that again, for me, that's not really that realistic a thing. You're always going to feel that attachment, that connection. That sense of who you were, and we don't sort of walk away from identities. We keep them and carry them with us, right? So, but this transforming idea is quite nice. But sometimes people just don't get there. So I wonder, just from the point of view of the new CEO, where dad or mom is not managed to make this transition and is not owning it, perhaps as much as you'd hope they would, and is maybe re-experiencing the difficulty, and it's let's say it can sometimes then become a barrier between you as parent and child, because you've got to try and get on and run the business. You kind of want to get on with your life, make a boundary or make a barrier, and that can be a block in your relationship. So do you guys have experience of this? I think it's quite a common thing. And how do you make sure that you maintain the richness of your parent-child relationship if this is still a problem?
So I think having a sort of binary approach to it, it's you and me, is the dangerous place to be in a sense, and facilitated conversations is in whatever way, whether it's another family member, an advisor, a friend, a say trustee, whatever, trying to have facilitated conversations, I think is much the best way to break that sort of deadlock, for sure. And it's not pitched for services, that's just the reality of it. And I always say about anything complicated, even when I'm drafting wills for clients, this is not about the mechanism, it's about the people. And if you get the people right, the mechanism will work, we'll make it work. You know, the law is flexible, you know, etc. So I do think it's about widening the conversation and finding the right people and having false starts if needs be.
Wonderful
Tom,
point.
sure.
Yeah, Tom, what's your thought on this?
Well, one of the things I learned as I got a bit older was the power of compassion. You know, that compassion is incredibly important in this. And, you know, if you're that young CEO and you're feeling, you know, aggravated by the way in which, you know, your father's behaving or whatever, I think it's important to be compassionate about that and to recognize that it's difficult for him, it's difficult for you. But actually maybe accepting that difficulty and saying, let me think about this, not so much as a succession, but as a transition, and allow him to be involved a little bit for a bit longer, and gradually, if you like, things will change because you're being more accepting of the situation. I think your natural default is to fight against it. And I think all that does is make it worse, frankly. And so compassion for me is probably the biggest differentiator in those situations.
It's a beautiful point. And maybe just wrap it up by saying, therefore, you can kind of see that there's no one way through these transitions. Everyone will find their own path. And I love your point about compassion, and just maybe make it reflexive and say compassion for self as well, because Absolutely. There's a huge degree of patience needed here, and you have to kind of acknowledge that sometimes you might feel a little impatient about it, but actually just, you know, to your point, you need to just accept the world the way it is, and find compassion for the situation, right? It's a lovely point, Tom. Thank you both very much for a beautiful conversation. So next time, 27th of July, Minter Dowell comes back. So Minter, you can see a bit of his bio here. Has been an amazing kind of brand leader, CEO out in the world. He's kind of very, very interesting, wide-ranging thinker and speaker. And Minter is joining me for the next Strategy Cafe for a complete change of time. We're going to be talking about how we make AI and empathy come alive. So really, this is speaking to customer service and actually also to therapy and kind of all sorts of human dimensions. But this idea of empathic AI, or you know, what's the quality of empathy that we really need? So it should be super interesting with real tangible examples about how the technology is moving along. So if you're interested in just that kind of more wide-ranging discussion about stuff that's happening for us all right now, then sign up for the next Strategy Cafe, and you can speak to Minter yourself and listen to me interview him on this fabulous topic. Just a reminder that you know, we also offer out there for everyone leadership development programs. Particularly pertinent to this one is Leading Yourself. We've been talking about that in a way throughout the discussion today. Tom's beautiful example of the Lifeline is one of the programs we have on our Leading Yourself course, interestingly, and it's a beautiful tool. It's an absolutely beautiful tool, really simple. So if you're interested in finding out a bit more about that, just come and check out our website. You can find a page, you can register to get a call and just, you know, chat about how all this works with us. That's it. So thank you very much for listening.